Hi, this is E.H. Ivins, and this is another edition of The Radical Reset. Today's subject is police, drugs, and violence. Now, I bring this up, I really don't even have to tell you why I'm bringing this up. Even as I'm doing this, and this is Monday, August the 8th or 9th, I think it is. Anyway, I don't know what date it is, one time for another. But anyway, to make a long story short, there was rioting again last night in Chicago, and looting, which goes with the rioting, all over a police-involved shooting. I do not know the details of which, but at this point, it's all becoming, at least to my 63-year-old white ears, a drone. It's just like another one and another one and another one. And I have a feeling it doesn't matter what color your ears are, whether you're white or black or brown or Asian. I don't think it makes one. I think it's just becoming so much noise. We're becoming overwhelmed by it. And the violence, you can almost become deadened to it, except it's so awful. And why is it taking place suddenly? It wasn't very long ago that New York City was the safest city in the world. And today it sure as shit isn't. What's gone wrong? What's gone off the rails? Why are we returning to a cycle of violence that for a time anyway, we had defeated? And so I'm going to try to answer those. Well, I'm not going to answer the questions why. The why is we're here. It's not important why. It is in the sense that, well, I've talked about it before. It really is the break. In the end, it's the breakdown of the nuclear family and a bunch of boys running around like, chickens with their heads cut off, like it's Lord of the Flies and survival of the fittest. But that's all too easy and too simple and too general. Let's get into the nuts and bolts. Let's put forth an anti-political, or allow me, I should say, to put forth an anti-political program. It's a 5-point, and I look down because I wrote them down. I want to make sure I get this right because I am 63 years old, and while I am not as demented as Joe Biden, I've been known to forget a thing or two, and I don't want to forget this. This is a very important subject because there was a time in this country not so long ago, I realized that when I was a little boy that could seem perfectly ancient, but there was a time when, my friend Jeff and I used to ride the streetcar to downtown Pittsburgh by ourselves at the age of 10 and 11 in the midst of the 1960s, and no one thought any violence was going to come to us. But today that would never happen. Helicopter parents are hovering over their children, and a lot of it with good reason. There's a lot of danger out there. There are a lot of things that are combining to make the world we live in an unsafe place. So, people of means, and again, this is not about race. This is about means. People who have any means at all are getting the fuck out of Dodge. Look at Detroit. You can go to Detroit now and buy a house for $10,000 or $20,000 because everybody with a brain in their head, black or white, it doesn't matter, has gotten the fuck out of there and moved to the suburbs. Not too far away is Dearborn, which is one of the wealthiest places in America. But, all I'm saying is that there has to be a better solution for our urban areas than run. So here's my 5-point suggestion. It's an anti-political suggestion because it's going to run afoul. All 5 points are going to run afoul of this special interest or that special interest, and will never happen as long as we have political parties pandering to special interests without any thought. And remember that nearly 70% of our legislators are attorneys, and what are attorneys but paid intellectual prostitutes? They go to college to learn how to argue on behalf of whoever pays them. And that's who makes up 70% of our legislature on both the Democratic and Republican side. It doesn't matter. Pelosi and McConnell are both attorneys, as is Schumer, and I can go down the list. And the bottom line is this: we have too many fucking lawyers who don't know what the fuck they stand for, standing in the way of every reasonable reform because they're being paid by special interests because it costs so much fucking money to run for office, and they're so blinded by the pursuit of power, and here we are. So anyway, we all know what antipolitism is, and if you don't, let me just say, I'm going to hold this up. This is A Radical Reset, my book. Make sure you pick up a copy. It's free to download if you read it on an e-reader like Amazon Kindle, and assuming you're a Prime member. And if not, you can pick up this neato paperback version for a reasonable charge, and the book will change your life. But back to more about that later. That's the manifesto, and it's, I have to tell you, it looks thicker than it is. The truth of the matter is it's pretty light reading. It's going to take you basically a day to get through, I think, but it's carefully footnoted. I don't say things without proving them, and I think you're going to find that anti-politism is the answer. The third ism, besides socialism and fascism, that as an alternative to our failing democracy, or our failing republic, I should say, as we have it now, and to bring us to a state of, well, near perfection. Nothing in life is perfect, but nearly perfect. Okay, police, drugs, and violence. Let's get into what we should do. Step number 1. legalize drugs. Now, I started with this because I've talked about it at length before, and again, in A Radical Reset, forgive me, I'm nakedly promoting the book. In A Radical Reset, I have an entire chapter devoted to the subject, and I could go on and on and on. But in this discussion, I'm not going to talk about what I've talked about before, which is it's ridiculous to turn an addiction into a criminal offense. And I've been in prison, and I can tell you that over 80%, more like over 90% of everybody in prison is there for drug-related offenses. And I understand that the drug police will tell you it's only 36%, but that's because they're only counting possession and sale and paraphernalia. But when you add in virtually all theft and all murder, aside from crimes of passion and psychopaths, everything else is drug related. And the reason for that is the reason I'm putting it number one on the list today. Because when you make something illegal, you create a black market, particularly when we're talking about addicts. And when you create a black market, criminal organizations will rush to fill that market. Just like back in the 1930s, Lucky Luciano, Meyer Lansky, Bugsy Siegel, and the rest rushed to beat prohibition. You just create black markets. There are black markets for everything. Anytime you make anything that when people want it, and in an addiction, they have to have it, and you make it illegal, you simply create a black market. And then what is on the black market becomes very, very expensive. And these organizations form to fill the need. Well, the bottom line is when you're in business, when you're in normal, honest business, like I was for years and you were probably watching me now, and you have a dispute with somebody else, whether it's in the purchase of something or negotiating a business deal with somebody or a contract, whatever the case might be, if they fuck you, you will go to court because that's what civilized people do. But what happens when there are no courts? And the answer is violence. So, if we legalize the single biggest cause of crime in the country, which is drugs, in other words, if we take away all the drug laws and we treat addicts as what they are, a health problem, as opposed to the criminal problem that we've turned this into, and we save the nearly $1 trillion a year we waste in a drug war that we've lost, so I always call it the drug route, and we're able to take care of the addicts on the side, all of the violence goes away, and damn near 80% of it, because there's no reason to shoot anybody. In other words, when you hear about a gang shooting in an inner city, the business of the gangs is drugs. And when they're shooting somebody, it's either because that somebody is encroaching on their territory, just as if somebody owned the Jack in the Box franchise and somebody tried to open up an illegal Jack in the Box across the street, or they fucked them on a deal. They didn't pay them the money they were owed, so on and so forth. We've all been in that situation in business, but they can't go to court. Their only recourse is violence. When I was in prison, on the prison yard, there were millions and millions of dollars worth of drugs coming through the yard, mostly brought in by the group that we called the Paisas, which were the Mexican and Central American nationals who were in American prison, as opposed to the Chicanos, which are Mexican Americans and Central American Americans, American citizens, who are primarily English speakers. Those two groups basically hate each other. But the Paisas bring in the drugs. And then they distribute it through the other races. They distribute it through their own race, the Paisas, although they use very little drugs. They distribute it through the kinfolk, which are the black guys. They distribute it through the woods, which are the white guys. That's short for Pecker Woods. Why white guys chose that moniker is beyond me, but that's what they call themselves. And they distribute it through the chiefs, which are the Native Americans. There are no Asian gangs on the yard because there are almost no Asians, and I was the only Jew on the yard at the time I was in. Now, actually, there were two of us, aside from the black Hebrews who pretended to be Jewish, but that's a cult and that's another story for another day. But anyway, to make a long story short, the drugs are distributed on the prison yard. When somebody fucks somebody else, when someone doesn't pay their bill, that's when it comes to violence. That's how most prison riots break out. What happens is they drag the guy into a bathroom, because that's the one place in the prison yard where there are no cameras. They put usually a padlock into a sock and beat the living shit out of him, sometimes to death and sometimes just to the point where they get the message. Usually not to death, because dead men can't pay their bills, but they're making a point. And sometimes they'll kill somebody because they're trying to make the larger point. But the bottom line is it's no different than a lawsuit. All the violence is the criminals settling a difference because they can't go to court. You can't put a criminal enterprise into you can't sue. I mean, it's obvious. So if you eliminate the crime, and the easiest and largest crime to eliminate is drug crime, all we have to do is legalize all of it. Or as a half step, I don't like this half step because it creates a bureaucracy, but it's better than what we're doing, decriminalize it like Portugal has, then all of this drug crime goes away, and all of the violence goes away with it. which is why the streets of Lisbon are much, much safer than the streets of Chicago or New York. If you don't believe that, Google it and look it up. It's true. Drug legalization works. It reduces violence. 80% of the drugs go away immediately if we simply legalize the drugs. But you see, that's only the beginning, because while we've legalized the drugs and eliminated the crime, and we've eliminated much of the violence if we legalize the drugs, we haven't eliminated the underlying resentment and the feelings, particularly on the part of the black community, that they're being poorly policed. And a lot of that blame does lie with the police. Now, I am not here, I'm going to beat up on both sides equally, so bear with me as we go through. But step number 2 is we must demilitarize the police. Now, look. Anyone, and I know when I was in prison, every 3 months they did something called a quarterly inspection. A quarterly inspection is they would take us out of our cells, or what we used to call our houses. They really weren't cells. It's most, believe me when I tell you, unless you're in the nutcase, you know, on Shawshank Redemption prison, that prison was a murderer's prison, but most guys are not in prison for murder. Most guys are in prison for something less than that, or for second-degree murder. In other words, non-premeditated. And they're in a lower yard. Okay, a lower yard means lower security. So they're not living necessarily in a cell so much as they're living in a warehouse that is divided into individual, I'm going to call them cells, but they're really very open. The doors are always open on them. You can come in and out as you please. Now, every 3 months they come in and they take all of the inmates out of the prison block, and they take us and they put us someplace secure. Depending on the time of the year, you know, this is Arizona. They don't hold us outside in the summertime, but they put us maybe like in the chapel, and then they tear our building apart. They tear apart, you know, all the beds, all the shelves, everything, looking for contraband, looking for drugs, looking for the things that, of course, they know are there, and they find quite a lot of it. And also, they're looking for violations of the prison rules. You know, a lot of them are petty, but they're just rules. And you know, you have to understand that in an organization like this, if there are no rules, then you get chaos, particularly when you're dealing with a near illiterate mass of angry men. So there are reasons for these rules and these inspections. Now, as they do these inspections, I just want to say that they all dress up in military garb. The purpose for this discussion is they all put on their Desert Storm masks, and this was way before COVID. And you know, they have out their guns and they go in there, you know, with their army boots on, and they all dress up. These are exactly the same guys that have been guarding us all along, but they dress up in their military outfits. And they just love the military feeling of it all. And policemen, even down to the, you know, to the ranks of policemen, are what's the word I'm looking for? They're all quasi-military. You know, you start at patrolman, they don't call them private, but then you go to, you know, to sergeant and lieutenant and captain. So I propose we do away with all that militarization of the police. There's an excellent, by the way, look below. I linked you to an article in Reason.com from Rand Paul about demilitarizing the police. But one of the suggestions that I have is to change the ranks. So instead of sergeant, lieutenant, and captain, it should go from patrolman to supervisor, first, second, and third class, and etc. In other words, rather than having military ranks, we should take all the military out of the police force. They are not a military organization. They are not trained to be a military organization, nor should they be trained to be a military organization. But the fact that they are, they have a certain swagger that breeds resentment within the communities that they police, and it is not an imaginary swagger. I have been on the receiving end of it firsthand. Policemen can be giant assholes, and one of the ways to take the edge off of that is to demilitarize the police. Take it away. Stop calling them sergeants and lieutenants. They're patrolmen and supervisors. And 1, 2, 3, 4. And that's the end of that. And you can have the chief of police, because there's no chief in the military. Well, there is chief in the Navy. I'm a Navy veteran. I know that. But again, let's just make these non-military ranks and demilitarize the police altogether. Okay? Next, patrol officers should be armed only with tasers and clubs. They should lose their guns. We should go to the British model. In England, which has plenty of violence and plenty of guns, in England, patrol officers and detectives do not carry guns. They carry tasers. And tasers get better and better all the time. And the taser industry and the companies that produce tasers, and taser, by the way, is like saying Kleenex. It's actually a brand name. But immobilization devices, there are plenty of entrepreneurs out there that will invent all kinds of non-lethal immobilization devices so that the police simply cannot kill somebody with a gun. It can't happen. The patrol officers, again, they're not military. Most policemen go through their entire careers and never fire their guns, even today. 99% of policemen, and if that percentage is slightly wrong, you policemen listening in, feel free to correct me and cite the articles where I'm wrong. But I know a lot of policemen firsthand, and having been in prison, I knew tons of them, and most of them go through their, and not just prison guards, but policemen as well. I've plenty of exposure. Most of them go through, thank God, they go through their whole careers and they never fire their guns. And then because of that, they're not really trained. These aren't guys that are out there, being trained for war and drilled every single day on the grid and out marching and practicing and doing war games and, landings. I used to live in North County, San Diego, just very close to Camp Pendleton in Oceanside. And I used to see them doing their amphibious landing exercises constantly, helicopters and landing boats and ships off the shore. And they practice all the time. That's what the military does. Thank God the Marines are on our side. But the police aren't trained, and they're not anything like that. They do a certain amount of, gun safety stuff, and they fire every now and then to be reasonably proficient. But they just don't deal with it every day. Why don't we just take it away from them so that there can be no mistake? Okay, and if a gun is involved, that's when they call in SWAT. They can expand SWAT. They can put more men into SWAT. When we legalize drugs, we're going to have a lot of funds available to build up SWAT if we feel that's necessary. But actually, I don't think it will be because of the drop in violent crime through drug legalization. But in those instances where the police are faced, remember, we've legalized drugs. The gangs are all out of business. Gun violence will become instantly not a great big giant issue. But when it does, when a psychopath does pop up, when there is a hostage situation, etc., terrorist attack, whatever it is, that's what the SWAT is for. And that's completely appropriate. But it also, in the time that the SWAT is called to arrive, gives time for cooler heads to prevail and think, is there another way out of this? Can we negotiate our way out of this? Is there some other way we can handle this rather than bring in lethal force? I'm not saying that it isn't necessary sometimes. I am not naive. I am not against bringing in the SWAT team. And that is a quasi-military force that trains constantly in how to use guns properly and perform urban warfare, the same as a special forces unit and the military are very similar to. In fact, most of those guys and gals, I assume, have special forces background. Bring in the specialists. But the day-to-day, the patrol officers, the people on the streets, the people driving around, the people walking around, I'll get to that in just 1 minute, and the people doing the day-to-day policing, as well as the detectives, have no reason to be carrying an armed, loaded gun. So simply take them away. Let's go to the English model. It works. That's how the English do it. I believe it's also how the Germans do it. Let's go to that model. Okay, next, bring back the beat. Now, that's not a song from the Go-Go's. That's, we got the beat. Bring back the beat means bring back beat cops. One of the great ways, so now we've eliminated drugs, right? We've legalized drugs, so the drug gangs are all gone and drug usage is way down and addicts are being treated as what they are, addicts and ill. Okay, let's pretend that's where we are. We've disarmed the police. They're only armed with tasers and clubs, and they have to have those things for day-to-day policing, just to subdue, for example, one man beating up another, which is much more common than one man shooting another, and they can't go out there, just to wave at them. Even the English police carry tasers, and no one's going to die from a taser shot. I've been shot by a taser, and it's unpleasant, but it's not, you're not going to die of it. And of course, we have the SWAT if it does get violent. So what I'm talking about now is, instead of driving around in a car and rotating cops through different parts of town, I'm saying have cops have beats and have community police stations, little kiosks, let's just say, set up in the communities like that look like those drive-through coffee, kiosks or water places that you see dotting around the landscape. And that's where the policeman goes to check in, and that's where he or she works out of every day. And most of the time they walk. And I'm talking about urban policing. I'm not speaking to small-town America. Small-town America is a different story where I think the police are going to know everybody anyway, but maybe I watch too much Andy of Mayberry. But anyway, having said that, I'm talking about urban policing here. I think the policeman should be a part of the community. And the best way to be a part of the community is to know who you police. And the best way to know who you police is to walk the beat, like they did in the old days. Gee, officer, whatever it was from West Side Story, fuck you, I don't know. But to make a long story short, in real life, make them become a part of the community, which leads me to my next suggestion and my final suggestion. Community involvement should be mandatory. So in addition to the 40 hours or so a week that the police officer working the beat, I'm talking about the patrol officers and the people who investigate crime within communities, at the very same time, they should be required to perform at least 5 hours per week over and above, out of uniform, in voluntary community activities within the neighborhoods they police. I don't care if it's joining the Kiwanis Club or picking up trash on the street or working with the local boys and girls clubs or whatever the case might be, but we've got to connect the police to the communities that they're policing. Again, so let's go through and just review it real quick. and then I'll wrap up this podcast. Number one, legalize drugs. I've gone through all the reasons. And remember, you can pick up my reasons for legalizing drugs and a lot more in the Radical Reset. Free as a download if you're using an e-reader, and this paperback is a nominal charge available to you on Amazon. The links are provided below. Two, demilitarize the police. The police are not a military force. Let's stop pretending that they are. Make them stop pretending that they are. Change even what they call each other in rank and have them become like, well, police. It's a whole different function than, subduing Baghdad. New York and Baghdad, as violent as New York might be, as violent as Chicago might be, it's not Baghdad. They're not police, okay? Next, they're not military. They are police. It's a whole different game. So demilitarize the police. Number three, patrol officers should be armed only with tasers and clubs, no guns whatsoever. We go to the British, and I think it's the German too, policing model, where the day-to-day police simply do not carry lethal force. You could beat someone to death with a club, but it would cause a big stink, and nothing is perfect, but it's a lot less likely to happen than shooting somebody. It takes a lot more effort, unless you're a maniac, to beat somebody to death, I would think. But anyway, I've never beat anybody to death. Thank God. I don't plan to. At 63, I think it's highly unlikely, but you get my point. Now, when there is lethal force required, of course, that's why we call in SWAT. And although I don't think it will be necessary, because the legalization of drugs will reduce crime by at least 80%, if necessary, because of the legalization of drugs, we'll have plenty of money available to fund and increase SWAT if that's necessary. Next, bring back the beat. Community policing should be community policing. Instead of driving around in cars and going back to a central police station, there should be kiosks of police, like you see at shopping malls, or like you see at, for coffee places at a strip mall, or drive-through water places, things like that. And these kiosks should be put throughout the neighborhoods. This is where the police should work out of, and they should be walking the beat. They can walk, in some neighborhoods, if it's dangerous, 2 cops together. In other neighborhoods where it's less dangerous, just 1 cop. But they should walk the same beat every day and get to know the people that they're policing. Familiarity breeds trust. Okay, so we need to get these people into the communities to know who they're policing. And finally, community involvement should be mandatory. Every policeman that works in a neighborhood, over and above their regular work schedule, should be required to perform a minimum of 5 hours of community service. It can be church or non-church. It can be Kiwanis, to picking up the garbage, as I said, anything you want, but they should be required to do community action work within the community every single week. Now, will these 5 things, if we do it together, make the world a perfect place? Of course not. Will these 5 things happen so long as we have Democrats and Republicans and elective office? Of course not. But in an anti-political system, when we do things because it's the smart thing to do and not necessarily the popular thing to do, because popular is a transient thing. One of the things about a republic, because we have 340 million people, we're not going to have a Swiss republic where everybody votes on everything. You have to have a republic, in a country of this size. In other words, people to represent you. But when those people representing you are people that aren't there for politics, belong to no parties, and are there because they are the ones pulling the wagon and know how the game is played and have common sense, you can do things like what I'm laying out here because it makes sense. These 5 points make sense. You can argue with me on the fringe, but that's what it's all about. Antipolitism is less an ideology than a system to govern in a way that makes sense. And it just so happens that it makes sense that the least government is almost always the best government. So it's kind of libertarian at the same time, but then again, there are times, and when you read the Radical Reset, you will see there are times when I call for government intervention, but this is not one of them. And that wraps it up for today. I think that we have pretty much solved the problem of inner city violence. Of course, no one's listening to us, it's just us. So what I need you to do for now is, because we are in the baby stages of anti-politism, is click the notification button, join and subscribe, please. Join the movement. Go to antipolitism.org, fill out the information, join me. Let's get together, let's build something special, and let's save our country, and let's save our culture. And with that, I thank you for joining me today, and this is E.H. Ivins signing off.